At that holiday lunch, with the scent of roasted turkey and simmering resentment thick in the air, my own mother looked me dead in the eye. Across a table laden with food I suddenly had no appetite for, and told me to leave. Her exact words, delivered with a chilling calm that I'll never forget, were, "It's time you stopped relying on the family, my name. You need to make your own way, so why don't you just go?" She wasn't whispering, she wasn't pulling me aside. This was a public decree, delivered in front of my aunts, uncles, cousins, and my bewildered younger sister. The silence that followed was so profound it felt like the entire world had stopped spinning, just to witness my public execution. Was I wrong for what I did next? Tell me if you would have done the same thing, because I honestly still grapple with it, even now. Let me take you back to the beginning, before that catastrophic holiday lunch, to give you some context. My name is Alex, and I'm the eldest of 2 children. My sister, Chloe, is 5 years younger than me. Growing up, our family wasn't exactly wealthy, but we were comfortable. My dad worked incredibly hard, and my mom, well, my mom always had very specific ideas about how life should be lived, especially when it came to me. She was a perfectionist, and while that might sound like a good trait for me, it translated into constant scrutiny. Every report card, every art project, every decision I made was subject to her intense review, often with a critical eye. Chloe, on the other hand, was the golden child. She was naturally charming, effortlessly beautiful, and seemed to glide through life with an ease that I, the more academically focused and introverted sibling, never possessed. My mom doted on Chloe, praising her smallest achievements, while my own, often more significant, accomplishments were met with a perfunctory nod or a suggestion of how I could have done better. This dynamic really solidified when I decided to pursue a degree in a creative field, specifically graphic design. My mom had always envisioned me as a lawyer or a doctor, something with prestige and a guaranteed high income. When I announced my choice, she was visibly disappointed. "Graphic design? Alex, what kind of future is that? That's barely a real job." She'd scoff, usually at family gatherings, much to my embarrassment. My dad, bless his heart, was more supportive, but he also had to live with my mom, so his support often came in hushed tones when she wasn't around. Despite her disapproval, I was determined. I worked incredibly hard, got into a good university, and even managed to secure a partial scholarship. I took on a part-time job to cover my living expenses, determined not to be a financial burden. But even with all my efforts, the underlying narrative from my mother was always that I was struggling, that I wasn't making smart choices, and that I was somehow always one step away from asking for handouts. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a small design agency. The pay wasn't fantastic, but it was a start. I was excited, finally feeling like I was building my own life. My mom, however, saw it as further proof of my mistake. "Still struggling, are we, Alex? If you had just listened to me, you'd be making real money now." She'd lament, often comparing me to my cousins what pursued more traditional careers and were, by her metrics, thriving. The truth was, I wasn't struggling. I was learning, growing, and building a portfolio. I was living within my means, paying my own rent, and handling all my bills. I rarely asked my parents for anything, primarily because I knew the lecture that would inevitably come with it. Chloe, meanwhile, had chosen a more conventional path. She went into marketing, quickly climbed the corporate ladder, and was doing quite well. My mom loved to highlight Chloe's successes, often in front of me, making sure I felt the contrast. Then came the year of the incident, a particularly challenging time for me. The design agency I worked for went through a major restructuring, and several of us were laid off. It was a brutal blow, completely unexpected. I immediately started looking for new work, updating my portfolio, networking, and sending out applications like crazy. I had a small emergency fund, but it wouldn't last forever. I was stressed, but I was also resilient. I kept my parents updated briefly about my job search, but I tried to downplay the severity of it, not wanting to give my mom more ammunition. What I didn't realize was that my mom had taken my job loss and my temporary unemployment as the ultimate validation of her long-held beliefs about my career choice. She began telling anyone who would listen that I was unemployed and relying on the family, even though I was doing everything in my power to avoid that very thing. I was applying for jobs daily, taking on freelance gigs, and cutting every non-essential expense. I still hadn't asked them for a dime. The week before the holiday lunch, things got particularly tense. I had been invited to stay with them for a few days to help out with preparations, though I suspected it was more about her wanting to keep an eye on me. I agreed, thinking it would be nice to be home for a bit, even if it meant enduring some of her passive-aggressive comments. During those few days, the snide remarks became more frequent, more pointed. "Are you going to look for jobs today, Alex, or just lounge around?" She'd ask even as I was actively on my laptop, applying for positions. Or, "Chloe just got another promotion. Isn't that wonderful? You should really talk to her about how to manage a career." I tried to brush it off to be the bigger person, but it was slowly chipping away at my resolve. I felt like a burden, a failure, even though I was doing my absolute best in a difficult situation. What really hurt was that she seemed to be actively trying to paint me as lazy and irresponsible to other family members. I overheard her on the phone with my aunt, lamenting my poor life choices, and how she worried I would never get back on my feet. This was a complete fabrication. I had several promising interviews lined up, and I was actually feeling quite optimistic about my prospects. But in her narrative, I was a lost cause. This brings us to the day of the holiday lunch itself. Our family always hosted a large gathering, typically with about 20-25 people. Everyone was there: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, even some extended family friends. The house was decorated beautifully, festive music was playing, and the aroma of a delicious meal filled the air. I had spent the morning helping my dad set up tables and chairs, and then assisted my mom in the kitchen, despite her constant critiques of my chopping skills or how I wasn't setting the table correctly. I tried to be helpful, to show her I wasn't a freeloading slacker. I genuinely wanted to contribute. The lunch started off pleasant enough. People were chatting, laughing, catching up. My mom was in her element, playing the gracious host. I was sitting next to Chloe, who seemed genuinely happy to see me and kept trying to make small talk, which I appreciated. But I could feel my mom's eyes on me occasionally, a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher. I had a bad feeling, a gnawing dread that something was about to happen. And then it did. We were halfway through the main course, plates piled high with food. My dad had just finished carving the turkey, and everyone was in mid-conversation. My mom, from her seat at the head of the table, suddenly cleared her throat loudly. The room quieted, everyone looking at her expectantly. She smiled, a little too sweetly, then her gaze landed squarely on me. "You know," she began, her voice carrying easily across the table, "it's so wonderful to have everyone here. It truly is a blessing to have family." She paused, letting the sentiment hang in the air, before delivering the blow. "But it's also important for everyone to understand that family isn't a crutch. Everyone needs to stand on their own 2 feet. I felt a prickle of unease. Where was this going? My heart started to pound. Then she continued, looking directly at me, her smile faltering just slightly. "Alex, you're a grown man. It's time you stopped relying on the family. You need to make your own way. So why don't you just go?" The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. The silence that followed was deafening. Every single eye at that table, including my sister's, was on me. My dad looked utterly mortified, his face a mask of shock and dismay. Chloe's eyes were wide, her mouth slightly agape. My aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I could feel the heat rising in my face, a mix of humiliation, anger, and utter disbelief. My own mother, in front of everyone, had just publicly banished me from her home during a holiday celebration. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Here I was, at what was supposed to be a joyous family gathering, being publicly shamed and told to leave by my own mother, for a problem that she had largely exaggerated. I was temporarily unemployed, yes, but I was actively working to fix it, and was by no means relying on the family. I had never asked for money, never expected them to support me. I was simply trying to navigate a rough patch, and she had chosen the most public and hurtful way possible to shame me. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have argued, begged, cried, or something else entirely? My first instinct was to lash out, to defend myself, to expose her blatant unfairness. But then a different thought solidified in my mind. Arguing would just give her more satisfaction, more fuel for her narrative that I was a problematic child. Begging was out of the question. My pride wouldn't allow it. Crying, absolutely not. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Instead, I took a deep breath, pushing down the surge of emotions. I looked at my mom, a calm, almost serene expression settling on my face, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I simply nodded once, slowly. Then, without saying a single word, I pushed my chair back, the scrape against the hardwood floor echoing loudly in the silent room. I stood up, still meeting her gaze for a moment, letting her see that I wouldn't crumble. I picked up my plate, which was still half, full of that delicious, now tasteless, food, and walked calmly to the kitchen, scraping the contents into the trash. I rinsed my plate and placed it in the dishwasher. Every movement was deliberate, quiet, and filled with a silent defiance. Then, still without speaking, I walked to the coat rack, retrieved my jacket, and slung it over my arm. My small backpack, which contained a few changes of clothes and my laptop from my brief stay, was already waiting by the door. I walked past the dining room again, past the still, silent, bewildered faces of my family. My dad finally found his voice, a strangled whisper, "Alex, wait." But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Stopping would mean acknowledging the wound, and I wasn't prepared to do that. I needed to escape with what little dignity I had left. As I reached the front door, I heard Chloe's voice, sharper, angrier than I'd ever heard it. "Mom, what is wrong with you?" But I didn't stay to hear the argument. I opened the door, stepped out into the crisp winter air, and closed it quietly behind me, the soft click feeling like the final nail in the coffin of my relationship with my mother. I didn't have a car, as I usually relied on public transport or biking, and my place was a good hour and a half away by bus. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I walked down the driveway, the cold air hitting my face, feeling a strange mix of profound hurt and resolute determination. I pulled out my phone, opened a rideshare app, and ordered a car. While I waited, I heard the muffled sounds of shouting from inside the house. I knew my dad and Chloe were probably tearing into my mom. But honestly, in that moment, I just felt a profound sense of relief. The constant criticism, the feeling of being judged and measured against an impossible standard, it was all gone, at least for now. I had been given my marching orders, and I was going to follow them, to the letter. The ride home was mostly silent. I stared out the window, watching the festive lights of other homes blur by, feeling a heavy weight in my chest. When I finally got to my small apartment, I locked the door, dropped my backpack, and just stood there in the middle of my living room, the quiet pressing in around me. It was over. The charade, the constant trying to prove myself, the endless cycle of disappointment. It was all over, and I realized with a strange clarity that I was free.